hello. Welcome to the Create or Die podcast. I am here with my very special guest, one of my favorite comic creators, writer, and artist of Apocalyptic Girl and Head Lopper and the new Snarlagon. Here is Andrew Maclean. How you doing?
Good. Hey, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. I've been following you for at least like 5 years now, and it's really cool to be able to interview you because I've had so many questions, and I guess this one will be a little bit different. I think the closest interview I've listened to you to what I'm hoping to get out of it is the one you did with Ink Pulp, because I feel like it really went into you as a person. So if that's cool with you, I'd love to go in that direction.
Yeah, sure. Whatever you want. Yeah, that works.
All right. Well, first, could we start with where you're from and how you got into art?
Yeah, so I'm from a small town in Massachusetts called Athol, Massachusetts. It's almost like New Hampshire.
Oh wow.
But it was a small town. And I remember always drawing, even from when the time I was really little. I just always loved to draw. And, it was the 90s, so comics were really big there around, and we had a handful of comic books, and eventually I would just, try to, like a lot of kids, I would try to copy the panels from the comic books, and that's kind of how I learned to draw was, things like that, and how to draw books, things like that.
That's cool. And I know that there was like kind of a gap in between like that kind of childhood journey and into when you started getting professional. What was kind of like your routine when you decided to make comics a career? Like, how did you learn?
Yeah, I think I went to college for music, and then when I was leaving college, I was really getting into comics again and really excited about it and loved the idea of making comics. And so as I decided that I wanted to try to do it, professionally, I drew a lot. I drew like every day. I was always working on some kind of comic, but I was also trying to absorb a lot of different stuff. I didn't know how stylistically, I wasn't sure how I drew, how I wanted to draw. So I was absorbing all kinds of different stuff just to try to learn and trying a bunch of different tools to kind of try to settle on what was comfortable for me, because I never really thought about, maybe having a voice or something. I just drew for fun. But while I was doing that, I was also just trying to get as much internet presence as possible, like any kind of social media. I got on it and started to post stuff. And so I just tried to get, just tried to be, get my name out there. And shortly after that, I started to do, small conventions and things with just, prints or something like that. And just kind of built it up piece by piece.
I feel it. And yeah, I've heavily stalked like that OG DeviantArt account that you had.
Oh
And
yeah.
because I was always, for a lot of different types of artists, things like voice is, is very challenging for them to like develop a style. It takes a lot of confidence, and yours is so distinct. And so I remember trying to track that journey. And in your early work, it felt like, I know for you it probably feels different, but it felt like you were always on kind of a path of like, you seem like you were always being yourself. Was there ever a moment where you were like, I gotta draw like these people or do this to be successful?
Yeah, I didn't think too much about necessarily success, so much as it seemed so improbable that I was really just like, if I can just make some things that I feel good about or whatever. So I was always trying to just draw in a way that that would make me happy, that I felt most
I feel it.
comfortable. But I definitely was trying to, emulate my heroes. Like one of the things that got me back into comics after college was finding like Mike Mignola's Hellboy and Gabriel Bad drawing the Umbrella Academy. Like for me, that really opened my eyes into like the different types of comic book styles. Growing up, I always
Yeah.
thought of comic books as like, as superheroes,
Yeah.
but once I was in college and I found other types of books, um, I realized that, oh shit, comics can be anything,
Yeah.
and so for a little while I was like, oh, I really want to draw like Mike Mignola and Gabriel Ba. And then I tried to kind of, slowly expand from there. But I was definitely, emulating my heroes and, trying really almost overly putting almost too much importance on the
Mm.
style. I was really intense about it. And it was like, oh, I got to
Uh-huh.
figure this out. But eventually it just was like, all right, it comes with, time and practice or whatever. So yeah, I was in that place, many times.
I feel it. Were you always a very confident person? Because I feel like your artistic career imbues confidence. Like the idea that, I'm going to go from music school to doing comics and I'm going to not try and work in the mainstream. And you went straight to like doing a lot of indie projects. And then you went straight from those to like writing and drawing your own stuff. Were you always like a person who thought you could just do whatever came to your head?
No, not really. I don't so much think of it as confidence as just really kind of like maybe passionate and
Mm.
impatient. Like if there's something that like if there's something that I want to do or whatever, I feel really like I'm not at rest. I'm like I get obsessed with it. So I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, like I want to go do this thing, and so I almost and that's specifically creative things. So like in the rest of my life, I have so much more kind of like self doubt getting in the way of things. But when something's creative, I'm just really excited about it, and
Yeah.
so I want to just go do the thing. And sometimes it's like the process that's really exciting. So like the
Yeah.
process is exciting enough to me that I can kind of get out of my own way a little bit when it comes to creative things. But
Hmm.
I wouldn't necessarily it doesn't feel like confidence to me,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
moment. Um, but I'm glad it doesn't come across as overly eager or something.
No, I always thought it was just dope because I'm creatively, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm pretty confident in other aspects of life, but creatively, I always second guess myself and don't trust myself. So I think for me, I look at someone like you who did everything that you did, and I'm like, wow, this guy is just like a savage. Like he just goes for stuff, and so I'm always seeing it from the different angles
Mm.
of the but yeah.
I think I do just go for things. Like I'm just
Yeah.
like I'm always like screw it. What's the worst that can happen? Like I could
Yeah.
try to do something that I want to do no matter what, and if I like say fail or nobody likes it or whatever, like that's all right. I still wanted to make the thing, and obviously I hope people like the things I make, but I also know that I would for until I was late like maybe late 20s, even 30 or so. I never really thought about making art as being something that was for other people. I was always
Oh
making
wow.
things because I just wanted to. It was like you know it's the process of making something that's really so exciting to me. So I was always like, well, I'll do it anyways. I'll make stuff whether people buy it or people shit on it or whatever. If people shit on it, then I'll make it and I just won't share it. Like
Yeah.
so. For me, it was always like if I really go for it and I can actually pull off some kind of creative career or whatever, that would just be the greatest job to be able to get paid for the thing I know I would do, anyways. So, but it was really nerve wracking when I switched from, I'd always drawn as a kid, but then high school into my, mid 20s, I was basically making music and not really drawing. So when I
Uh-huh.
like all of a sudden made that twist, by the time I was, I don't know, 27 or something, and I was like, no, like I put all this energy into music, but I'm like, really want to make comics. That felt really strange to me. I knew what I wanted, but I was afraid I had wasted all this time, or like, how could I like
Yeah.
change gears all of a sudden and then stop trying to be a musician and put all my energy into making comics or whatever. It seemed like a crazy kind of choice to make out of nowhere. So I remember being really kind of nervous about that. But I just I got obsessed, I got obsessed with making comics. So I just wanted to do it.
Yeah, I can totally understand that, and I guess to that, because that was going to be my next question. I know that that type of decision is, especially when you go to school, because you have to pay money. So that type of decision is a heavy decision.
Yeah.
Um, like what was going on? Because I know in my life I had experiences where like maybe I thought I wanted something, and the closer I got, I realized, okay, this is just not for me. Like, what was it that were you in school and just like you started learning about what it meant to be professionally involved in music, that you just realized like less that was what you wanted to do with your life?
Yeah, I think I started to realize, like, which activities kind of make me happiest. So
Mm-hmm.
I was always trying to hold bands together, which was difficult because you need, five or
Mm,
six people or something. And then you have to, it's all collaboration. So you've got to, kind of get creatively on the same page as everybody else involved. And then there's a certain amount of like work ethic involved, with being in a band. Like, does everybody want to practice, as much or as often, or, so there's all these other factors. And I kind of eventually realized one of my favorite things about making music was just writing songs and recording them. And I was like, oh, all my favorite things are the things that I
mm,
kind of do by myself,
yeah.
and then once I had like a song recorded, like I wanted to move on to the next thing. And so, and, around that time when I was like, mid 20s or whatever, I started to draw more, just, for fun. And it reminded me of how I felt like writing songs and recording, where it was like, I didn't need anybody else. It was very simple. I could do it at my house. I could do it at any time of day. And, all I needed was like a piece of paper and a pencil, and I could draw a comic book if I wanted, and it's just like, that was, it's really simple. Everybody has a piece of paper and a pencil.
Yeah.
I didn't need all this equipment. I didn't need people. I didn't need to, book shows or anything. And it just, and doing a drawing or something is like recording a song and never playing it again, right? Like, you do a drawing, it's done. You get to move on to
Yeah.
the next thing. I always loved
Yeah.
the kind of exploratory aspect of, writing music or doing a drawing. Um, and with art, you're always going to do something new. You're not like playing an old song again and again and again. So I think it just kind of really appealed to me how easy and accessible it was to draw. Like, I could do it, in the middle of the night, at 3 a.m. or something when it's quiet. So yeah, I started to get obsessed with the fact that I think I could do it all by myself. I didn't need anybody else or expensive things to do it.
Yeah, I think that's like a whole alternative path specifically to comics. I feel like that there's people who've only ever wanted to do that, especially people who maybe grew up in like the late 80s and 90s. When you look at like Liefeld and McFarlane, and like, because those guys were doing that and also living like rock stars. But I feel like there's a lot of people who come at it from a other angle. Like for me, working in animation, there's always extra steps and other people involved. And
Right.
then you start to realize the beauty in comics and that you don't need anyone else, and it's just your voice. And I think that there's like two sides of people who get into comics. It's like the people who realize that creatively it's like the most pure, and then other people who just that's all they ever wanted to do. So that's interesting that you came from that angle. Yeah, I just and what type of music were you making? Because I know you're a metal guy. I mean, I know you're very eclectic music taste. I follow you on social, but I know I picked up Mastodon from you for sure.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that at the time I always wrote either like heavy metal or like progressive metal. So yeah, things like Mastodon. kind of, or Opeth, or things that are both like, evil and melodic, simultaneously. Some of my favorite bands are like Symphony X or Soilwork.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so I was making that kind of thing, or trying to,
I feel it. That's crazy in my head because I heard interviews with you telling these stories. I always imagined, I knew you were a metal guy, but I had always imagined that when you went to school, you were making like film soundtracks because that.
Well, I thought about it actually. Like I when I did go to school, I considered either doing a songwriting degree or film scores, because I also did really love film scores, but also I realized that I think I loved film scores, didn't necessarily want to be a film score composer. You know what I
I
mean? So,
feel it. Yeah,
but yeah, I could see that. I always loved both. And I love, really, even in heavy metal, I like very kind of grandiose kind of sounding bands.
I feel it. Well, that's super dope. Some of my questions, I don't know if they're gonna apply. I'll ask a few of them anyway, but if they feel passe, because I think I'm learning that you're much more of a creatively pure person, and it doesn't seem like you overthink things past what makes you happy. So if any of these questions come off as like passe, you could just say I didn't really think about that, or
All
we can
right,
move
fair.
on. Uh, that I think forging a creative life can be, I mean, it's very challenging, and I think that the journey, whether it's the rejection and like whether it's people not buying your stuff or not getting the job or not getting the publisher, it can be really hard. And even if you make it, I think it can change you as a person going through that. Like when you were kind of on the path, because I understand that I'm sure you weren't making a full living off of it when you first start, because you're just starting. Did that path of you finding your lane and then being able to put out books, like how was it going through it emotionally, and did you ever feel like it kind of changed you as a person for better or worse, and like how did you maybe equalize after you kind of knew, okay, I'm gonna be okay?
Um, yeah, I think the whole thing it's always tough,
Yeah, okay.
one way or another. Like, it always feels fragile, and it always feels very temporary. So it is always like, what's next? I got to keep it, rolling. But yeah, there was like when like for a little while, it was like oddly enough, one of my kind of like moments of opportunity was when I couldn't find a job. My
Mm,
wife and I, we moved, and I couldn't find a job in our new town. And so I thought it would be easy. I was like, I'll find a regular job. I'll try to draw comics at night or something. And when I wasn't getting any interviews or anything, I started to just use any kind of resource I could find online to find, like, graphic design work and things, and illustration, anything. And I was never able to, really make ends meet during that time. But at the same time, that kind of scary moment where, I didn't have a job also opened up every day became this opportunity to really
mm-hmm,
try to move the needle, like, every single day. And so it was kind of a blessing in disguise. Like, I absolutely needed to make it work because I had no other options. And,
mm-hmm.
and yet if I didn't have that moment of like terror, I don't know if I would have pulled it off, like, both because of the time and the absolute need that I had all of a sudden. Because, like, before that, I always had a day job, and then I drew at night and everything. And all of a sudden, there was this moment where I didn't have a day job. I couldn't find one. And that meant spending all day trying to make my hobby, a job.
I
Um,
feel it.
so, like, that's kind of like where it started. And I never ended up having another job. It ended up, working, like, somehow, just like, project by project. And so from that place where it just felt like any little thing you were so grateful for, any little job or anything, to eventually, getting in with eventually getting a project, a graphic novel with Dark Horse, and then moving from that into taking Headlopper, which we had self-published, taking that to Image, and then it just, working. There was so long I had just thought that, this isn't working, keep pushing, that it almost like snuck up on me, a couple of years into it, that was finally just like, hey, like, you can, I still struggle with this, like, oh, you can relax a little bit. Like
Mm-hmm.
you've like, you've got it. It's working, and, and I still have a hard time believing that, like, tomorrow that I'll have work to do, or that I'll get another job, or that people will, keep buying my books or whatever. Cause it always feels kind of fragile. It always feels like something that I could lose, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's, as much as it's, there's been a lot of, changes, it's sometimes still hard to, I guess, accept.
Yeah, I totally get that. I think a lot of people that, because essentially you're an entrepreneur, even if it's not like, I mean, you are. I mean, you between like Laser Wolf Attack and, these books being published. And I think that there's always a feeling that the well could dry up at any point for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Uh,
You mentioned Laser Wolf Attack, which is a company I run with my wife. We started doing t-shirts, but we also do like toys and like mugs and clothing. And that has always been, that from that state of mind, from that place, like, oh, look, if people don't buy my next book, maybe we can lean on Laser Wolf Attack, selling, things like coffee mugs or something like that, so having a few different kind of venues for making money is from that mentality of, this thing, like you said, this well could dry up. So we try to have multiple wells in case one of them does dry up.
I feel it. That's super smart. And uh, were you with your wife the entire time, like you were on your creative journey?
Yeah, pretty much. I met my wife like right before college, just as I was about
Oh
to go to
wow.
college. So I was like 20. And so, yeah, we ended up, going to college at the same time and, become, professional at the same time. So she worked, a regular job for years. And then, eventually, we started talking about the idea of running a business together of some sort. And, around that time I had put out a t-shirt and, it seemed to be selling pretty well. So I was just like, you know what? Like, making t-shirts is like a fairly low risk,
Hmm.
business.
Yeah.
Just because all we'd have to do is pay for our inventory and everything. And so we're like, all right, screw it, let's give it a shot. And, so since then, that was probably 6 years ago or something. So since then, yeah, Aaron and I work together on pretty much everything.
Oh wow, that's super sick. I think
Yeah.
um I think a lot of people can underestimate how important having a supportive spouse is, because that can be the person that can really make you question yourself in tough times. And if they support you, it can do the opposite. It can supercharge you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. There was, especially during that period where I was unemployed and everything, I was so self-conscious about the fact I wasn't contributing, and we were living in New York City at the time, which was a really expensive place. And so, I was constantly like, just like, oh, I had like I had always worked in grocery stores. So like my one rule looking for a job was like, I don't want to work in any more grocery stores. And so I was at, so many times I was just like, all right, I gotta go I gotta go apply to grocery stores. I don't know
Yeah.
where else I can get work or whatever. But it was always her that was just like, no, hang in there, just keep pushing or
Wow.
whatever. Like, I know you're worried about it, but it'll be okay. And so, I even though I was really uncomfortable at the time, I was like, all right. I'm just gonna keep pushing it. And she's always been that way, and she's more involved now than ever before. And yeah, it's absolutely true. And it helps too that she's like a great, you mentioned being an entrepreneur. She's a great entrepreneur. Like she's good at managing businesses, or just
Hmm.
management, and numbers. A lot of the things that are my weaknesses,
Hmm.
she's really good at. So as a team, we get like way, way more done than I could ever do by myself.
Wow, man, I think that's so sick. I think outside of like the books, which are great, and the art, which is great, like the relationships and like what you can have with somebody, like in regards to building something, I think is like even better than anything else. And it's hard to communicate that to people if they haven't gone through it, or if like because no one sees you guys' relationship. I mean, they probably see, I see you and your wife on Instagram, but I think the most beautiful elements of that are only between you guys, and only you guys know what you've been through together. So that's really cool that she's been able to have such an impact on your life in that sense. That's really cool.
Yeah, well, I'm really grateful. I feel really lucky. I mean, we've been together for, 20 years now, and there's
Wow,
like we complement each other, really well, I think.
that's really sick, dude. Well, that was that question. I think you answered it super well. I guess beyond that, the next question I kind of had was, there's a depth in your writing, and I think writing is super interesting because people have such varying opinions on how to do it and how to learn. How did you become such a good writer? It seems like you started off, at least, I mean, with Apocalyptic Girl, it seemed like there was already a lot of depth and structure to the story itself. Like, how did you develop your voice as a writer?
I don't know. I feel like I'm still trying to figure that out. And I try not to. Oh, I mean, in everything I do make an effort not to overthink it too much. Especially where I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I've been really lucky in that, both people have, embraced my art and writing enough that I'm like, well, I don't know why, but I don't want I don't want to get in my own way. And so I often try to, just write from the same place that I was describing drawing, is
Yeah.
just just try to make myself happy. Like if I think something is funny, you know, like it gets a chuckle out of me when I think of it, then I'll probably add it. I try not to force things. And mostly I just try not to make things kind of too boring.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, like, for me, that's why it's so much easier to write, say, like action scenes and stuff like that. Or, like, recently
Yeah.
I was trying to work on an idea that's not really an action idea at all. And
Yeah.
there's no big fight scenes in it. And I was just like, oh my God, how do I tell a story when it's all about talking, where it's never about like action. Um, and so I think that's one of the things. It's one of the things that I kind of naturally started to include, as I was coming from this place as as an artist, right? So I was thinking about like my introductions into writing is thinking about what things look cool. Like it's
Yeah.
writing for drawing. So I'm like, what are the things I want? Are the things I want to draw first and foremost? If it's Headlopper or something. But I just got off writing a Godzilla series, so it's also like, what are the cool things that I want this artist to draw? And so that's where I start. There is some structure but my main goal is how do I weave a story to get to do all these things that will inspire cool
Mm,
drawings.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Apart from that, I'm just trying to figure it out one step at a time with writing. I, I, when it comes to like art and writing, I'm a little reluctant to this sounds silly, but to like learn too much, like
I
in a
feel it.
very official way. Because I know, like before I went to music college, I one of the things I loved about music, like I said, is like the exploration and things. Was that it felt like magical and mysterious in a way. And then when I went to college, I learned a lot about music, how it functions and everything. Learning so much, all of a sudden it lost a little bit of like mystery to me, because
Hmm.
I could like you could track it down and make it look like math if you want. And so I'm always afraid that you know that learning too much about art and writing will kind of take away some of the mystery that I like about it.
Hmm.
Um, so that might be a weird kind of way to do it, but I almost try to just feel it out. There's things that I've learned that I like that probably come up in more of a style, like just I try to repeat things if I want someone
Yeah.
to hear things. I try to repeat it and bring things back around, whether it's a
Yeah.
joke or it's a story point. I've learned that like I like repetition. I think it helps like really emphasize a point, and it helps keep your audience from getting lost. And so I'm always trying to be clear as well. So I'm always doing things like, repeat a joke, to keep them, into realizing this is all a cohesive thing.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying that I just kind of figure it out, like
I
one thing.
feel it.
And I try to listen to those things that to me I got excited about. I was like, oh man, I really like that part. I'm like, all right, then I'll do it again, maybe.
Yeah. I feel it. And when you say you tried not to learn too much, does that mean you never like got into any of these books in structure, or you like took them, maybe read one, and then you said, okay, I'm putting it away. I get kind of the gist. I'm not gonna.
I haven't, I listened to, podcasts and things. So I've heard a bunch of writers, talk about craft, here and there. And I read like Stephen King's On Writing, which,
Oh yeah.
has some really cool points that I was like, oh, I definitely do this bad habit or whatever. But even he doesn't talk a whole lot about structure. He's one of those writers that, kind of like, once as his idea comes to a point of him realizing that it's an idea that has enough content, enough like it's a good enough idea that he could figure it out. He just starts, but I'm kind of an organized um,
Yeah.
writer, so I have the whole story like mapped out before I start, making a script or something. So yeah, apart from the little bit that I've learned from writers talking and that Stephen King book, we'll say I just kind of feel it out, rather than like when it's one of the things I always, I don't really love a super formulaic story. So I always hope that if I kind of feel it out and make sure, it stays exciting or whatever, hopefully that'll give people more genuine surprises as well.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, yeah. That's I think that's super interesting, and I think as someone who because I read Headlopper, and I I felt like I was, because I'm trying to learn myself, and so I did deep dives, and I saw different posts from yours and kind of gleaned some of what your process was and started adopting it myself. So now like I write out, like I have a little notebook with all my little notes, and I put
Nice.
and I write out the whole story, because I saw you post something that you do that, and then I have a separate book for my layouts.
Yeah.
And so, because I think that organization, anyone who reads your stories understands, like, because the cool thing is you always, if something happens, you generally you've planted it prior, or you bring things back in a way that even if something's a shock, it's never too much of a shock that you don't feel like the possibility, you never feel like you're copping out of anything in your stories.
All right. Well, that's good. Yeah. I mean, you're right. Like I keep a notebook, and that's exactly it. I heard this writer, talk about, her process is kind of like Stephen King's, where she's like, all right, I've got a premise, I'm just going to start and then
Hmm.
figure it out as I go. And that always seems so wild to me. And she had talked about in her last book, she got, really far into it and then realized she got a new idea and she was like, oh, the book should really be this. But to incorporate that idea, she had to throw away something like 97,000 words worth of work. And I
Damn.
was like, oh my God, you could have worked out the ideas first. Like, I
Yeah.
know, like, process is process. Like, if that's how you do it, that's how you do it. But for me, that is like, I can't imagine backtracking so far and
Yeah.
wasting all that time. And so, yeah, for me, I make a roadmap, and I follow it for that reason. Is that, so you can plant if you know where you're trying to go, you can plant something, early on.
Hmm.
And, and which isn't to say that there isn't discovery along the way. Like sometimes once it's already written and then I'm drawing it, I'll realize like, oh, hang on. Like there's, this connecting tissue will make that point even stronger or something. So you can keep tinkering.
Yeah.
But I hate the idea of throwing away like
Yeah.
a ton of work to make it better. I'd rather do that work up front.
Yeah, for sure. And I always feel it when I read your books because like one of the things I really love, especially like in Lopper 2, I feel like well you did it a lot in one as well, but I love the fact that your stories like you have really good cutting. So we'll be following Norgal, and then we'll cut to what's happening with like the little red guys, and you'll see that they're having their own thing, and then we'll cut back to Norgal, and then like I love the fact that you have like this almost like way of doing comics that's almost like a television show that we can break the story up so there's always interest even if the story is moving forward, but it makes it even more kinetic. I don't know how to describe it. Like we spend time.
Yeah, I mean, if you're following, say, there's like two parallel stories or something, I'll try to, where I'm always just trying to keep the reader interested and try to keep them
Hmm.
from being bored. I'll try to, if I'm going to show them something, I want the reader to learn something. It's
Hmm.
like, so I'm always like kind of asking questions and answering them. So to make sure that something's worthwhile, like you should learn at least how a character feels about another character, if not where they're going to go next or something. And, it's like, you set expectations and then you kind of reward them. So I always try to balance the questions um,
Hmm.
that the reader might be having, like, oh, why is he acting like that, or where did they get that knife, or something. And then you can bounce back and forth between if you have like two parallel stories or something with almost like little cliffhangers, like
Hmm.
in those are the moments where you want to switch to the other team so that you can so then your reader is kind of sitting in suspense a little bit, almost like waiting to go back to like the A story or something.
Hmm.
um, so yeah, I try to I don't want anyone to get bored. That's my
Yeah.
that's always the thing, is like I always think of I like Quentin Tarantino movies,
Yeah.
how the excitement stays up even if it's a quiet moment. There, someone is saying something that's interesting enough that you're never getting bored. It's like it's obviously a juggle, but yeah, that's always, I just don't want to do boring things. I want my comics to be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes you're trying to get a point across. So if people are like talking, that's the other thing, is if people are talking, I want them to get to their point quickly if I can, because
Hmm.
even if I want someone to you can have a character talk a certain way and you can show something about their character, which is cool. But if you want the whole train to keep moving, they've got to get to their point kind of fast. And so that's the other thing I do, is I try to get people to say what they're saying
Hmm.
quickly so the reader
Hmm.
doesn't fall asleep.
Yeah, I think that's another reason because you and like I interviewed like Daniel Freeman, And like the one thing I was reading you guys' books like kind of back to back,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things I really loved about you guys were you guys are kind of the primary Westerners that I was reading that had uh, a manga like vibe in the sense that I was turning the pages constantly. Like I never got stuck on a page. And even like my favorite comic artist writer ever is Frank Miller, but there are times where it's so much text on one page that I kind of I get stuck. And with you guys, and it feels less fun. Luckily, he's so good that you stick with it. But like you guys are like, I'm just flowing so quickly through the book, and I'm just having a great time. Is that something you learned from manga? Because I know you're a huge manga guy.
It's hard to say. I do think that I do really love manga, especially I love these days. I love like some kind of like '70s manga because it feels like it's fun, and
Mm-hmm.
that's generally if it's fun, I feel like it is fast, and I feel like
Mm-hmm.
comics are usually read better if you kind of keep pace with them like it's a TV show. You know what I mean? Like as soon as someone says something, you move on to the next panel. So I try to draw in a clear, kind of simple way as well, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
where you don't have to search for. Like if I want you to get something, I want you to get it right away. I don't want you to
Mm-hmm.
feel even. I guess it's like you can, if you love art and comics, you can sit there and you can look at it a long time, but you're breaking down the conversations. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I try to think of my comics as something that you would read quickly. So
Mm-hmm.
if I need you to understand that someone picked up a cup, I'm going to put that like really in your face so that you can read that panel very quickly and just keep moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know, but I do love manga. It's hard to say what I love about it exactly. Some of it is just fun. I love it,
Yeah.
but I also think of it so much um, as being so similar to comics. It's hard for me to pinpoint exactly what are they doing that makes them such page turners. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I do love I love one of the things I do love about it is, and feel like I learned a lot from, is I think the fact that the art is black and white makes
Mm-hmm.
them, they can't lean on color to tell any of the story, right?
Mm,
So they've
yeah.
got just like lines and maybe like a gray tone or something like that to like tell the story. So even if it's a really detailed art, they can't rely on color to really highlight what you need to see. Um, and so I find myself really fascinated with the way they use like gray tone and like cross
Mm-hmm.
hatching and
Mm-hmm.
kind of tell the different planes,
Mm-hmm.
foreground, middle ground, and background. So
Mm-hmm.
like I get obsessed with like clarity. You know,
Mm.
um, it's because I feel like if I'm trying to tell a story, like if you don't know, if you get lost, then I've failed, So
Yeah.
I always go clarity first is kind of like my mantra.
For sure, for sure. I mean, anyone who's read your work can see that that's like truly a priority of yours. Even something is like to me is fucking genius as someone who loves cartoons, but like the way you will simplify Norgal in these different ways to where he doesn't even have a face sometimes, but
Right. Yeah.
because there's a focus on something else, I just love that. I think it's so smart, and I think is part of why like I love your work because you do things that only can be done in a comic and in that format, and it just makes sense because it's like who cares if he doesn't have a face right now? You're supposed to be watching out for whatever else is going on.
Right.
So I think
Yeah.
it's genius.
Well, I think I started, one of the reasons I started to do little things like that is I had read a quote by David Mazzucchelli, and he talked about um, in your drawings focusing the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so his example was this panel of a woman riding a bike in Central Park. And the woman was drawn very cleanly, very crisply, because your eye is really focused on it. But then in the background, the trees and everything, they were drawn kind of, blobby, almost as if like you were drawing, a photograph and she was in focus and the background wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I started to kind of um, think about, what do things really look like if they're, say, really far away, like, and how much you like really lose definition when you look at things and, from different distances or whatever. So I started to ask myself like, oh, like what, what are the important things? How do you if you were to like start subtracting lines or things that you're drawing in
Mm.
there, what are the most important ones,
Hmm.
So if I'm like, say, so for example, like drawing Norgal's face, his most important, I'm going to draw very small. What are the most important lines to keep? It's probably, his eyes or his eyebrow line and
Hmm.
like his like mustache. So he ends up with like two dashes and a triangle because, at a distance or something, um, you wouldn't see all the details of his nose and his eyebrows
Hmm.
and things. It would just get mushy or something. But then if I draw something like, for example, that sometimes I'll start omitting things, even if it's not really tiny or something. And sometimes it's just for fun, and you find
Yeah.
something that's like the two dashes and an upside down, V that I use for Norgal's like face or something. If it's fun, I'm like, oh, screw it. I'll just draw it when it's up close and personal too. But yeah, it's going to be a moment where his facial expression isn't really important. That's
Yeah.
not the point of the story. So I don't, put a bunch of effort into drawing that bit.
I feel it. That's an amazing philosophy to have as someone. I think any artist, but because the painters do the same thing,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, like things turn into just like these brushstrokes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And then I just wanted to ask, are you, what's like your hard stop on time, or are you good on time? Like,
Yeah, I'm good on time. Yeah, I'm doing all right.
okay, all right. Let me know if, because I could talk all day. I never want to. I want to respect you guys' time and bring you
Oh, no
on.
worries. Yeah, we're good.
All right. Well, the next question I kind of had following that train of thought, or one, I wanted to pay you a compliment that I also thought was cool because I redraw a lot of your panels and study, because one of the things I really love that you do is your compositions are so amazing in the sense that you always are using the environment to like one, your shapes are like always just so sick. You have so sick shapes, like and then you point them at different things and you frame the characters in these interesting ways. Is that like something that comes naturally from you?
I mean, I think I learned a lot from when I was like, one of the reasons I got back into comics is I got really obsessed with Mike Mignola's artwork, and he's
Mm-hmm.
so shape based. I feel like I had learned a lot from him. I
Mm.
did, when I was unemployed, I was and before that, I had done some graphic design work, so I'd done a lot of just moving shapes around. But I
Mm.
also, like I said, I think of, I try to keep the storytelling really clear. And
Mm-hmm.
so if there's something I need you to really see, I try to get other things like out of the way.
Mm.
And I also do things like, um, to like avoid like tangents or weird
Yeah.
moments where I know that it'll confuse the eye. I just do my best to not do those things and like make sure that every time one shape, intersects with another one, they're not, interrupting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I pencil really tightly also. So
Mm.
like I make a plan for the writing. I'm the same way when I draw. So like a lot of artists, their pencils will be really scribbly and they'll pull out this really beautiful drawing out of there. I just don't work that way. Like my
Yeah.
pencils, um, are exactly that look exactly like my inks. Like when I
Mm-hmm.
ink, I don't leave my little roadmap at all. I just follow exactly the lines that I penciled. So like I've done all of the exploring and everything before I get to inks. So I think that helps,
Hmm.
figuring everything out, that early on. You're gonna get away. You're gonna eliminate a lot of, awkward, shape language. That way you're gonna eliminate a lot of tangents by just making sure you don't have any first,
Yeah, yeah. I think that's yeah. You do it really well, and if anyone's listening and wants to learn, just pick up one of your books because I feel like there's always examples that just the framing to me is always the cool one because your work is so stylized. It's pushed in a way that it's like just super appealing. So yeah, I think it's just really dope.
Thanks. I mean, sometimes even when you're normally if I'm framing a shot in some way and if you see me use a kind of weird or interesting camera angle, it's probably
Hmm.
not for the reasons of it being stylistically cool or something. It's probably a storytelling
I
technique,
feel it.
So it's like if I really want you to notice something, say I really want you to look at, someone's shoes or their feet or something, but also in that panel there's someone, running away, or whatever. Like I'm gonna make sure that I put the camera angle like super low next to the feet so you can see those feet, but also make sure that you can catch this person clearly running away in the
Running.
background. And I'm gonna draw the buildings or something in a way that there's a big empty space where that person's running away.
I
So
feel it.
so my choices for like camera angles and stuff are usually more practical than anything. And sometimes
Hmm.
sometimes I'll end up drawing kind of like bent, weird perspectives that don't really, say work in real life. And it's usually for storytelling. It's usually me just being like, I want to make sure that you can see this thing, that thing, and we get in as much, say, background as possible.
Hmm.
I mean, like I said, it's usually a clarity choice. Like someone else had been recently, like, oh, you pick such interesting camera angles, and I was like, it's to me, I feel like I pick very boring, safe ones because
Yeah.
I always default to the same mindset of make sure that it's clear.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's really dope, and yeah, that's good to always remember. Like even someone like you, whose work is so cool and stylized, there's still a priority of clarity and storytelling, and you can still end up with like so much appeal, even without being too focused on that. So I think that's
Yeah,
dope.
I think so. I mean, and for example, like I always feel like I opt for simple, first. So, like for example, I think sometimes as artists we're really compelled to draw like humans from every crazy camera angle known to man or whatever. And I find that, if the storytelling option is still open, that I can draw just a straight on, like, totally, right angle, look straight at someone. I'm gonna choose that,
Yeah.
because it doesn't take much of a camera angle before the perspective starts getting weird and wonky and a little
Hmm.
bit confusing. So it's like if I want you to know who's talking, I'm going to really make sure you see them clearly. If I want you to see, an action they're doing, I'm going to get really close to it and show it as
Yeah.
clearly as possible. Try to get their body out of the way so you can really see the thing that you like need to know.
Yeah. That's cool. That's really cool. And then I guess before bouncing back and forth in between craft talk, you know, you self publish Head Lopper, but I think I heard you say your first release work was Apocalyptic Girl through Dark Horse. Is that true?
Yeah, so I had self published 2 issues of Headlopper,
Mm-hmm.
and I had done a little bit of work for Dark Horse,
Mm-hmm.
and enough that they were going to give me a shot. And so they're basically an editor I was working with was like, we can. He's like, I can probably get a project greenlit if you follow these parameters. He was like, if you did 6 by 9 100 pages, black and white. He's like, and you didn't take a big advance. I can probably get that book greenlit for you.
Oh
And
wow.
basically it was just like, look, this would be a really cheap product for Dark Horse to make, and so we're not asking them to invest a whole lot. Um, at the time, I had a friend who had put out a black and white book, and I'd gotten the impression that stores didn't like that it was black and white. So I was like, I'll color it, um, but I'll color it, and but otherwise, yeah, I'll do it. And they were like, oh, you can do. They'd seen the self-published Headlopper stuff, and they're like, oh, you can do Headlopper if you'd like. Um, but I knew that the story was too long to fit 100 pages. So I put Headlopper on a back
Mm,
burner, and I was like, look, I've got this Apocalyptic Girl story that I know I didn't really have much story figured out yet. So I was like, I know I can hit 100 pages on this. So then I worked with Dark Horse on Apocalyptic Girl. Um, and then while I was working on it, at some point, Image asked if I wanted to take Headlopper to them. So I just got really lucky. I was able to go from self-publishing Headlopper to work on Apocalyptic Girl with Dark Horse, and then by the time I was done with Apocalyptic Girl, I could then move
Headlopper.
back to Headlopper, but over at Image. So it
I
just
feel it.
it worked out. I felt really lucky.
And did that editor like just like did you let the editor know that making you writing and drawing your own book was something you were interested in, or did they kind of just come to you and say, "Hey, you're doing good. Do you have any ideas?"
I had pitched a bunch. I
Oh,
was
okay.
doing as many conventions as I could. I had pitched a whole bunch of stories with other writers. So I had
Hmm.
sent a lot of packages to different publishers. And it was getting to the point where they started to remember me. And
Yeah.
so they're like, so I was starting to get, so my rejections changed tone eventually. So a long time they were just like, we don't like this. And then eventually they were like, oh, we like this art, but we don't like the story, or we like the story, but we don't like the art. You know what I mean? And then it turned to, we like this, but we already have something too similar to this. And
Mm,
so a couple of publishers started to be like, but keep sending us stuff. So I would,
mm,
I sent, so I sent, as many things as I could, like as often as I was able, in a wide variety of collaborations and solo things. And so at some point, Dark Horse had seen, um, they'd seen Headlopper, which is something I had drawn and written, and then I had sent them another pitch that was something that I had drawn and written. So they knew that that I was comfortable working for my own writing, or from or with others. But at that point, where I had made some Headlopper, I was starting to do basically all my own writing,
stuff. Mm,
because I for me, Headlopper was really creatively satisfying. It was the first thing that I had really done. It was the first comic that I had written and drawn that I actually published. Anything else that I had, published was with other writers.
mm.
So yeah, I was just getting really into writing by then, and so I think they just knew that that I would want to, I guess. Um, but yeah, it was kind of weird roundabout way that like I'm really grateful for the editor, because it was the editor who was just like, look, you know, let's pitch Dark Horse, his bosses, let's pitch them a cheap thing. It was
Hmm.
good. It was kind of like smart business.
I feel it. And damn, I can't believe I almost got lost on my question. Like, do if you could go back, like, would you recommend, because working with editors you can also learn like a lot about maybe what works and what doesn't work. If someone's new and they want to kind of do what you're doing and writing and drawing their own story, do you recommend going straight to like trying to self-publish, or do you recommend someone pitching their idea to a dark horse and trying to go through that kind of traditional path first and just to even learn?
I mean, it's tough. I think either way is fine. But I just know from my point of view, I had done, you know, where I had done a bunch of pitches and got rejected. I felt like I had all this work that I had done
Mm-hmm.
um, that no one was going to see. Like it was like I made a pitch, I pitched it, nobody wanted it, and now it's just going to disappear and never exist. And so I had all these pages all
Mm-hmm.
these comics that I'd made that weren't going to ever turn into a real comic, and that was just kind of driving me crazy.
I
And
feel
I
it.
was like, I was like, I just want to make something is that I enjoy making. That was the first Headlopper. When I made self published the first Headlopper, I was like, if I never make any comics, if I ever get I get work, but it's on books that I don't really enjoy working on. I was like, if I self publish this Headlopper comic, this could be that one time that I did just whatever the hell I wanted and I put it out exactly the way I wanted. Um, and so I thought that at the time when I did it, that 20-page Headlopper self published comic was going to be the last time that I worked on it. It just happened
Mm-hmm.
to work out. I didn't even pitch that one. Like the other things, I had all done pitches, but with this one, I was like, I just want it to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, I'll pitch it after the fact, after it exists, and then that's when it finally worked or whatever. But you can do whatever you want. If someone wants to just pitch, it works. Like they do look at the pitch materials that they get.
Mm-hmm.
So it's totally an option. But if you want to make sure that your thing really exists,
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, self-publish it, kickstart it or something. Um, because I do think that if you actually finish a project and publish it yourself, the other thing is that you show these potential partners, these potential publishers, you show them that you're like a hard worker, that you can get
Mm-hmm.
things done, and if you can give them a tangible copy and they can flip through it and read it, then they can say like, oh yes, this does work cover to cover. They
Mm-hmm.
showed the initiative to like they didn't need to be babysat all by themselves. They went and they made a book and they printed it and everything. So I
Mm-hmm.
think self-publishing does show publishers that you could be a good partner for them.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's actually, yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that angle. That definitely, because it is an investment on their end. Like they have to spend money and
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
exactly. Yeah. And um, Apocalyptic Girl was my like first big book, and it took me 16 months to do. And so you got to think they're paying an editor to work with me the whole time. They gave me an advance, not enough to live off of at all. Like it was pretty pointless to take it. But that was $4,000 of their money. You know,
Yeah.
um, so they put up $4,000. They paid an editor to work on it with me. And then if you actually finish the thing, they're going to put tens of thousands of dollars at least into, printing the thing. So
Mm,
they're going to be a little selective. They don't want to start a project that won't come to fruition. They don't want to start a project if you can't, work on it for 16 months.
mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I get that.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot more sense, and I think it definitely helps add to like the conversation around like, what is it do you get, what is it you actually get out of working with a publisher, and like I think breaking it down to like the business fundamentals of how much they're spending, how much it costs, and the time can help you see it from their perspective a little bit more, especially when it comes to them taking percentages because it is an investment.
Yeah. I mean, they do a lot for sure. I think one of the things that you get out of publishing too is their kind of partnerships in
Hmm.
their branding. Like, people will come to trust a publisher's, selections of creators that they work with.
Yeah.
But also, they're the ones who also distribute the books. So they're the ones who, get them in stores. But yeah, they're probably investing just in print costs alone, $20,000 or something.
Oh wow.
So Yeah, they definitely offer a lot.
Okay, well, definitely that's yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I ever thought about it from that angle, especially when you put numbers to it, because you think of it as just being ink on paper, but it's really
Mm.
not. And you have to get a lot of sales of like a, you know, maybe $12 book, $13 to $20 book. You have to clear that amount just for them to start making their money back.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So if you have a creator-owned book, like Headlopper or Apocalyptic Girl or something was, at publishers like those, so they make back all of their money first before the creator starts making money. So if say it cost them $15,000 to make the book. Maybe they gave you an advance. They gave you, say, $4,000 up front, and then it costs another $11,000 to print it or something. They keep all of the money until they make all that money back.
Mm-hmm.
And so you, as a creator, you don't start getting paid your royalties until they kind of are made even again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's that's pretty standard. Um,
Yeah.
but it could be a challenge, certainly, when like you've just spent all the time making something, but you still won't get any money for however long it takes to pay back the print costs.
Okay. Well, that leads me to another question that I had, because again, stalking you on social media to learn, especially in preparation for the interview, you seem to have immediately started posting not just once a day, but multiple times a day. And you have like a very, like, a solid following on like Instagram. And so do you feel that like your social media presence has grown your audience for your books and stuff like that? Has that helped it? So like right now you just put out Snarlagon. Have you noticed that there's like a boom when you initially released the book?
Yeah, I do think social media, is I don't think if you're getting started, I think it's really important, and especially if you're like self-publishing and stuff, because you're your whole company. Like you have to do
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. If you're lucky enough to work with a good publisher who makes sure your work gets out there, maybe you don't need to do social media. But yeah, you definitely, if you're getting started, you definitely need it, and it's a challenge. I know when I was first on Instagram, it was before Facebook owned it, so they didn't have the same algorithms, and it was
Mm.
way easier. It was
Yeah.
way easier to get people to see your work
Mm-hmm.
before those algorithms, and so I had built so much of my Instagram like following or whatever before the
Mm-hmm.
algorithms came in. So like I feel really lucky in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's especially like I told you, my wife and I run Lazy Wolf Attack. Like we have to do all the posting, like
Mm-hmm.
Snarlagon, we published that. So like, you have to constantly tell people that you've got stuff for sale or you're making a thing, or they won't know. I mean, I always have to, even if I feel like I'm being obnoxious, I always try to remind myself, like, well, not everybody sees everything you post.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, you always picture these people seeing every single thing, and I'm like, no, they're not. They're busy living their own lives or whatever. So I try to
Yeah.
get I try to get stuff out there,
I
but
feel
that's a
it.
tough
That's
job too.
Yeah, it definitely is, especially the way you do it, because it's like you're hitting it hard, like constantly just engaging.
I try, especially like if we have like when the say that we had a Kickstarter going for Snarlagon, it's like yeah, you
Hmm.
gotta do it every day or whatever. But like right now, I've been off it for a little while, but we were
Yeah.
touring for with our book for a while, so I was trying to do it constantly to tell people where we were gonna be having events and everything. But yeah, so sometimes I'm on it really good. Other times I fall off. I get tired of it, and then I
Hmm.
slow down, and I have to remind myself, like, no, you got to keep doing it. Yeah, you
Yeah,
got to keep feeding the beast.
definitely. I think one thing that anyone could look at everything that you've done too is like kind of this. this artist that grew, because there's a lot of guys who are like older than you who got started before the social media really boomed, but because you were kind of like your career was born in this the world, it wasn't that much different than it is now. I think the thing looking at guys that are like younger like me, looking at someone a little bit ahead like you, is that it takes a long time and there's going to be ups and downs, but there's not like you don't have to always be on top of it, because like now we can go look back at your work from 10, 12 years ago and see what you were doing, and it's like I think you were consistent over the long haul, which matters more than like month to month or even day to day.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think you're right. I think being persistent is kind of the most important thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, sometimes I still get impatient, or
Mm.
whatever. I have to remind myself, like, no, you have to just keep doing it. Like, you can't, and it's for a lot of things, you can't, what's the phrase? A watched pot never boils. Like, it's almost
Yeah.
better not to, like, don't even bother looking at your followers. Just keep posting. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
don't bother counting or keeping track. Just keep doing it. Like, you've got to, if you're trying to see something, grow, it's probably going to be too slow, but it is worth the effort. If you like your job, if you like making comics,
Yeah.
it is worth just keep on feeding it.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's over time. You can look at something like, oh man, that guy's killing it or whatever. And it's just like, well, that guy's been doing it for 20 years or something,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
consistently.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it is good to remind yourself just to be patient about these things for sure.
I feel it. And this question, I feel like I might know the answer just by clues you've planted throughout the conversation, but I'm just curious because everyone's different. You're a prolific. Well, you share a lot of things that you're reading all the time, and you're a prolific like reader. From what it seems like, you're always, even not just comics, reading novels, and then you post about them. Like, do you have a idea of like are you reading to learn, are you reading to get ideas, or do you have a schedule to make sure that even though you work every day you're still consuming great content, or are you just so passionate that like that is your pastime, that's your excitement, you don't do video games, you just dive into these
Well,
books?
I work. I think it helps if reading or something just fits in your schedule somewhere. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I was gonna try to just find a chunk of time in the middle of the day to read, I would never
Mm-hmm.
find it. So like for me, like it's a good way for me to wind down and go to sleep. So I read every night just in bed. If I like flip through my phone, it's gonna like it keeps me awake. But I also
Mm-hmm.
notice if I read comic books, it kind of keeps me awake. I think
Mm-hmm.
looking at pictures is just I can't like relax.
Mm-hmm.
But if I read like a novel in bed, like I kind of can release the day and kind of like slow down, and it helps me fall asleep. So it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of fits my natural life. So I end up reading more novels than I read comics just because they're a good way for me to end the day. But otherwise, I'm pretty kind of obsessed with work. I work a lot of hours. A lot of comics people do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm usually working until supper time, and then I cook supper, watch a little TV with Aaron and the dog, and then read a little and fall asleep. I do
Mm-hmm.
think that finding a place naturally in your life where you can squeeze in a habit of reading is definitely helpful. I know, like, I have friends, and my dad always did this. Like, we'll get up. Some people will get up really early. They'll be like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I'll just have a little bit of time by myself, drink a cup of
Mm-hmm.
coffee or whatever."
Mm-hmm.
So some people, do that. But I don't know, if you're looking for more. If anybody's looking for more time in their life for reading, you can just try doing it instead of scrolling before bed.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work for everybody. Like my wife Erin, if she reads in bed, it keeps her awake. So she's like, but if
Yeah.
I scroll, I get sleepy. So she scrolls and I read. But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I would if it didn't work for helping me go to sleep, I would read only on vacations and never
Oh wow.
never any other time.
That's good. But I mean, it's hard because like reading is what like feeds you with so many ideas if you want to
Yeah,
be like, and like that's one thing I really got from like that Stephen King book. He said if you want to be a writer, you have to read, and
yeah.
he's someone who like really sets that time. And I think the thing that I really gathered from you is just like you're always reading, and then you have these ideas that I'm like, where does he come up with it? But if you're always feeding yourself, there's all these seeds you're getting from these different stories.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I'll try to like because once I got the series at Image, I
Mm-hmm.
started to read like tons and tons of fantasy. So I do
Mm,
have my like favorites. You know, I like genre stuff, so I love fantasy and I love like science fiction.
mm-hmm.
And so that's the stuff I want to read anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I'll make it a point to read a lot of, something that I kind of want to learn about.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and we do get our ideas. We do get inspired by, the books we read and the movies we watch. So um, I'm always kind of thinking about that stuff. Seeing something, you're like, oh, I loved how abstract that was, or how whimsical it was, or something, and
Mm,
it will make me want to, add something that has that flavor in one of my stories somewhere.
mm-hmm. And I've noticed, like for you, it also bleeds visually. Like I know that like you add a lot of different, like if you look at like the first head lopper to 2 to 3, like they tend to have like more and more distinct visual styles that are kind of separate from each other. And is that always coming from things that you're reading and being inspired by, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna start hatching?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's usually, you get inspired by, whatever you're looking at. So I feel like if I'm like, I started to do more and more cross hatching from, falling in love first with, Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa manga. The
Mm-hmm.
lighting and the cross hatching in that is so beautiful. And it really
Mm-hmm.
made me want to, spend more time doing different lighting techniques in the
Mm-hmm.
comics, where before that I had left a lot of the lighting up to the colors.
Mm-hmm.
And then so because I had been reading a lot of manga and falling in more and more in love with it, I started to do more and more cross hatching. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's definitely a direct correlation between the stuff I'm ingesting and what ends up on the page.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And we'll start winding down now. I just have like a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure.
I've been looking forward to this for a while. I've always had a lot of questions for you. Um, Damn, I lost the one that was just like right on my head. Damn. That's what happens when you talk too much. You like lose the question that you
Yeah,
literally just had.
I constantly do.
I hate that.
I'm surprised I haven't been like, wait, what was the question again? I always have to do that.
Now you've been super succinct. Oh well, here's one question I definitely had. Your work, and I know now that you're doing stuff that just excites you, but your art style is like a lot of people who also have a business mindset would dream to be able to like, because like if you look at the Headlopper toy, if that went to Hasbro, I feel like that would cook. Like, do you and but you feel it seems like you as an artist have always, like, for lack of a better word, you'd never come across like you're whoring yourself out, whether it's like forcing an animation or forcing toys or forcing any of these things. Do you like, how do you look at like what you make and like keeping it sacred, or is it just because these opportunities haven't presented themselves so you get what you can by what you're able to produce?
I mean, I always want to make things that I'm excited about that I like. So if
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you know, that's like my only metric, right? Is like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
did I make myself happy with it? So if I want to make a product, it's probably a product I collect or I enjoy. Like, you know, we do pretty well selling hats, and I wear a lot of hats. So like I
Yeah.
have opinions about hats, and we've made some toys because I collect toys. And so that's usually, you know, the only metric that I feel like I can kind of really, you know, trust is do I like it? You know, so
Hmm.
like a drawing is done when it's like, well, I like it now.
Yeah.
And so even my art style, you know, kind of evolved from that. When I was, you know, earlier, I was always trying to draw, you know, superhero style, like Big Two, Marvel, DC stuff, and I didn't really have the ability. But I also noticed that I thought the drawings were best, you know, in their kind of preliminary stages. As soon as I
Mm.
kept adding more and more details, you know, they weren't as good. And so but I always felt compelled, you know, to, you know, put all this, you know, extra detail. And then when I fell in love with, you know, some simpler art styles, you know, like Mike Mignola, Gabriel Ba, I finally gave myself permission to to draw different. I was like, look, you don't need to draw with such heavy detail for it to be
Mhm.
good. And once I like learned that lesson, to just kind of follow my instinct and be like, no, that's enough. It's done.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I just kind of, I've tried to keep following that instinct. So everything that I make, you know, my metric is, would I want to buy it, or was I excited to write it? Was I excited to draw it? And so I always feel like if you're, you know, if you're having fun making it, it'll probably, you know, be fun to experience it, or at least more likely to. So that's always my metric, is like, you know, make something that I like, and
Of
maybe other
course.
people will too. And like when I started making stuff, that was my metric. But I didn't think people would like it. So like,
Yeah.
but I was like, but I'm having fun, right? Like, so I
Yeah.
try to have fun, and it's been, you know, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you love something and people
And no
don't
one else
care.
likes it.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
all right. That happens too. You just gotta, you know, like we were saying, just keep doing it. You know, make it. If someone doesn't like it, go on and make your next thing.
Yeah, that's great advice. I guess what I was getting at was like, um, I guess what I meant was you seem to stay pure with the comics, and there are these other products that you bring, but I guess there's I think a lot of criticism people can throw out there to comics nowadays is that a book maybe feels like a Netflix pitch,
Mm-hmm.
whereas I felt like your work is could so obviously translate to other mediums, whether it was video games or animation. But I guess what I was trying to say or get at is there's yours is, even though it could be all the things that people want to make their work into, you don't seem to be pursuing those things, and or if people are approaching you, which I'm sure they are, you seem to be so selective that whenever we do get a Headlopper cartoon or mass produced toy, it's going to be like like how do you approach other mediums of your stories and stuff? Like how do you pick and choose or decide to pitch or not pitch?
I mean, I don't. I'm. I think it's easy sometimes to. I don't feel like I have, you know, endless opportunity. You know, certainly,
Mm.
like a lot of the things that we do make and have, we've pursued, you know, on our own because it was just something that, you know, meant something to us. I have, you know, there are things I've tried to make that just, you know, didn't work out. It was too expensive, not the right partners or whatever. I do think having, you know, good partners is really important, but it's also really hard to choose
Mm.
good partners. Um, but you know, it is true that I definitely didn't set out to make, you know, I don't think you call something headlopper and expect it to
True.
be this viable kind of, you know, mass market thing. I always set out to make a thing that I thought that was a little nutty.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't as nutty, I guess, as I thought. But I do know that I really love to just sit and draw. So
Yeah,
I'm glad that you think that it feels pure because it really is. My comics are my favorite thing to make.
yeah.
I have worked, a little bit in animation, and worked for some other industries, and I have noticed that my favorite thing to do is to sit and just draw a comic. So
Hmm.
I really, as much as I would love to make a Headlopper cartoon and a video game and every other thing, the thing that excites me the most to make is the comic.
The comic, I feel it for sure. And yeah, the last two questions I wanted to, and then I'll let you go. Uh, you know what? I'm not even gonna ask that. The official last question I'll ask is, what is Snarlagon? Where did it come from? And I guess what do you want to say about it that so that we know to buy it?
Yeah, so Snarlagon is in between each volume of Headlopper. I wanted to draw a kaiju comic, a short
Mm.
kaiju comic for years, and I always wanted it to. I'm a big fan of old kaiju movies. I watch a lot of them while I draw, and I always wanted to kind of write a kaiju comic that I thought existed in kaiju movie like logic.
Hmm.
So I wanted to draw. Maybe it's corny or whatever, but I wanted to try to draw a instead of make a like kaiju comic, it's a
Hmm.
kaiju comic about a movie. So I wanted to try to draw like costumes, try to make it look like a rubber costume, try to draw um, try to make it look like puppets. So it was like this kaiju
Mm.
comic. There's like if there's airplanes, you might see like a little string on the airplane, or when I draw like the cars, I try to make them look like little toy cars and stuff because
Hmm.
I love how old kaiju movies look handmade
Hmm.
because they largely were. And so I wanted to do this kind of love letter to old monster movies. And so Snarlagon follows this teenage couple, and they're on their first date, and then these crazy crustacean creatures erupt from the ocean and start marching through this city. But they're in luck because Snarlagon is a friend of all humans, which is kind of like a Gamera joke. And he comes to Earth, and the kids lead Snarlagon to the city to defeat the crustaceans and save their friends and their family and all that.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so I've been so it's this kind of quirky kaiju book. I've been kind of calling it like Godzilla if like Wes Anderson made it or something because
Nice.
it's really it's a very art forward book. It's silly. And it's inspired a lot by like 60s and 70s Gamera movies, which were these movies that were for kids really. And so they always have this kind of strange logic to me where they're trying to make the little kid kind of the hero. And
Hmm.
so the kid will walk into a science lab and be like, I don't know, maybe we could kill the creature with sunlight. And then like the scientist will be like, yeah, that's a good idea. And somehow the kid is always like the smartest kid in the room and all this. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to make this kaiju comic that follows that logic of a 60s monster movie. And so I realized, in doing that, and it's kind of tongue in cheek, kind of funny. And I
Hmm.
realized in doing that, with the exception of some swearing that was in the first script, I was like, it's basically a kid's, like it's inspired by
Mm.
kids' movies. So it's kind of a kid's book. So in my second draft, I pulled out all the swears and everything. And I realized like, this is like, yeah, like little kids probably would really like this. So I've been saying that I wrote it
Wow.
for adults, but it's suitable for kids. So yeah, a bunch of, and I thought it'd be cool if parents who are maybe a fan of Headlopper wanted to read one of my comics with their kids. Now they'd have one, and so
Yeah.
that's kind of it came from this love of old monster movies, and then it kind of morphed into this kind of kids kaiju comic along the way somewhere. So hopefully it's something for both adults and kids.
Nice. And can people can people order it if they didn't participate in the Kickstarter?
Yeah, we just put it up on our website. It's laserwolfattack.com. That's the company that my wife and I put all of our T-shirts out through and everything. And yeah, I also wanted a cheap book. I wanted it to be something that kids could afford if they wanted to pay for with their own money. So it's only $10.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so it's available online right now.
Dang, dude, I've been seeing you post about it, and I think that's so sick that like the way you thought about it. I know it didn't start that way, but the fact that the idea of you making something for kids is so cool because by the time they read Snarlagon, they might turn 14, 13, 14 and can pick up Lopper
Yeah,
and
yeah, absolutely. And I almost all the comics that I make are things that I'm really nostalgic for, that I fell in love
mm-hmm.
with when I was a kid, and realizing that I started to think of things like, oh, when I was a kid, I watched these movies with my older brother, and fast forward 30 years later, and I'm still thinking about them, and they're making me want to draw things now. So I thought, I was like, yeah, it's cool, the idea of, you know, making a book that kids can read. It can be what inspires them to either, continue reading comics for their whole life, or maybe it makes them want to draw pictures or something like that. And I just really liked that idea, and it didn't, seem all that important to me to have a few swears in this comic book.
Yeah.
It seemed more important to make sure that kids could read it, since it's something that they'd probably like.
Well, I think that's really, really cool. And yeah, I think it's a great note to end on. And if I could summarize probably the overall message from this whole podcast, correct me if I'm wrong, would you say the entirety of your journey and where you are today is do what you love, focus on what you love, make yourself excited every day? Is that how
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, I always feel like, I'm an atheist, so I feel like this is my one chance. Do you know what I mean?
For sure.
This is my time to try to enjoy myself. And yeah, do what you love, make what you love. Yeah, I'll sign off on that. Sure.
For sure. Well, if you have any parting words for the audience or anything you'd like to say outside of that, let me know.
No, I think that's it. We talked about Apocalyptic Girl and Headlopper. We talked about Snarlagon. You can get all those books on laserwolfattack.com. And any of that stuff. But no, yeah, that's it. That was great. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course, thanks for coming. I mean, this is full circle because I remember starting this podcast a few months ago, and literally when I made my list of guests, like you were like the number one person that I wanted to interview. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, dude. That's awesome. So